back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Hey, and welcome back to the show. We're talking about family law and everything you need to know, unfortunately, when you get into this situation. So before the break, we talked about all kinds of different things, but the one thing I touched on was you have separation of assets, and mom doesn't want to sell the house because it's the family home with the children, and it's their neighborhood and their school and their friends. That's totally understandable. But in Vancouver, this is a possibly $1 million plus asset. And how do you stick handle that one?
Well, in the old days, they used to be able to try and postpone the sale. And that was the case where they do. The women would want to stay in the home with the children. That's really not the case anymore. That you can ask to postpone the sale, but it doesn't happen very often because everyone knows the value of the assets. If one party wants to keep the asset, often the court will give that person an opportunity to buy out the other one's interest, either through actually purchasing the interest or offsetting it with other assets.
But what if they're not in a position to pay for that?
If they can't, then often it ends up being sold.
Okay. Now, can you get into a situation when you say, okay, we'll come to some kind of contract where the kids are 10 and 8, and then when they reach 16 and 18, we'll sell the house and I will get whatever half of that increased value? Oh
yeah, you could certainly do that. There's nothing wrong with agreeing to anything in that kind of situation, as long as you can you're willing to wait your 8 years for the value. You also take the risk in case values go down, which doesn't happen in this city, but
one day it might. One day it might. It could all end with a thud. We don't really know.
Like if you were someone who owned a house and tried that in Calgary, you're crying now.
Yeah.
So the one thing that you have to make sure is that the person who keeps the home actually is able to keep it,
maintain it,
pay the mortgage, etc. The one downside of doing that, of course, is if you're still on the mortgage as a guarantor or whatever, you're probably not able to buy your other one because you're still bound by the previous mortgage.
Yeah, because that accounts towards what you can afford.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Now, we hear the story of the dad moves out and he's in a basement suite eating tomato sandwiches. And does that happen still? Or so that the mom can stay in the house with the kids and all that kind of stuff?
Well, there's, as with all anecdotes, there's always a bit of truth to them. And if someone moves out and has to pay large amounts of spousal and child, their lifestyle may be a little lower than they used to be. It's usually not as bad as that.
The TV shows.
But, it's... It can get worse. It's not all as bad as that gives them on the radio, the Sarah Evans song "Cheating," and the guy's eating like Kraft dinner or something, and she's made a gourmet meal and stuff. That's usually not the case, but certainly there are times where the person who has to pay so much in spousal and child may not be able to afford the same kind of house as before.
Now, talking about the media version of what you do, how does it differ, Sarah, from the TV shows about family lawyers and divorces and all that kind of stuff? Is it pretty sort of mundane compared to what you see on TV?
Yeah, I don't think I would ever characterize family law as mundane, but it is. It's definitely a lot different than what you see on television. You don't have these big aha moments, and you're not just wandering around the courtroom, saying everything perfectly. It's a lot of behind the scenes, and I think that's something that we always try and tell our clients is that a lot of the work you're not going to see it. It's a lot of behind the scenes negotiating. There's a lot of writing letters, which probably is one of the biggest banes of our existence, but a lot is accomplished through that. So a lot of cases settle ahead of time, and you really don't have these big courtroom battles with people throwing things out, and so it is definitely more just going through the motions and covering everything off. And there's a lot more to it.
So you would have things like the family home, RSPs, investments, bank accounts, insurance policies, pensions. We're going to do a whole show on pensions coming up, and then maybe a business that you have together. So you said that most of these divorces or separations don't go to court.
That's correct.
So how do you do it? Do you whiteboard it? Do you say, Bob wants all this stuff and Mary wants all this stuff, and then you basically put a value to it? And
back to the letter writing again.
That's basically kind of like how you're doing it.
Yeah.
You determine what all the assets are. You can go through the discovery process and examine the other person under oath and see their financial statements, etc., which are sworn and required under our in court. And then you can go to mediation, and Sarah's a trained mediator now, so someone who will try and figure out how are we going to divide all this money so that everyone comes out equal. Now,
Or they feel equal anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, equitable doesn't have to necessarily mean equal. You know, there's times where I'll tell certain clients, look, you're entitled to say, we'll say $200,000, but you can settle it for 190 and save yourself 15 or 20 of cost to get that extra 10, and the emotional cost. You know, how do you put a price on your ulcer not sleeping over it, right? So, you know, but basically, yeah, you would have we have these what they call Scott schedules that we can type up, which says who owns what, who wants what, and then if you get a mediation, a whiteboard, here's what I have, here's what she has, and sum it up.
Who are dirtier fighters, men or women, do you think? And who caves easier? Generally, is there a stereotype, or is it case by case?
It's case by case, but in my experience, it tends to be that the mums tend to, because they run out of funds to fight in many cases. The dads, in most cases, who end up having to pay, they will just agree to pay a bit more just to
make it end. Yeah,
exactly.
Take the pain away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And is that good advice? Pay, and often just to let it end.
Yeah, I think the reality is that most clients don't realize what the cost is of taking something through to a trial, and the money they were actually fighting over, that's now actually gone, and they're paying on top of that to take it to trial.
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up, is the money, and we all hear the only people that win are people like yourselves. Now, obviously, you have a business, you provide a service, and people come to you because they need you. And I always say that nobody likes lawyers until you need one, and then they're your best friend. And it's true, because people come to you and they're in a situation, you got to help them out. But at the end of the day, you don't want to take away all the family assets. No. You want to resolve this. So what is your advice? What do you say to people?
Well, in a lot of cases, I say, look, you know, here's the when it gets down to near settlement, I'll do a cost-benefit analysis. Here's what you may get if you go to court. Here's the optimum you can do in the best case scenario, worst case scenario. Here's what you've paid so far. Here's what you can get out of. Like, I had someone was wanting to go to trial over like $5,000. It's like, well, your first day of trial is going to eat up that difference anyway, and you may still have to pay the extra $5 plus perhaps more.
Court costs maybe, or is that? Or do you get that? No.
They can be costs if you lose. That's paid against it. Unless your trial goes 5 or 6 days now, I don't think you pay any court trial fees anymore and such. But basically, at the end of the day, it's how much is going to be in your pocket at the end, and then factor in your emotional aspects as well. And
are people becoming more realistic about that? Do they go in knowing that? He's saying, you know, who do you want to be the winner here? Do you want it to be you, your spouse, or the person that represents you?
And I think that's I think that's always going to be an issue. It is easier for some people to pull the emotional quotient out of it, and for others it's not. And it's really breaking it down to this is the reality of the situation, and you have to take principle out of it. It's not who wins. Nobody wins in family court. So it's really breaking it down into the numbers and if it's worth it.
Now, you say that majority are resolved. You don't have to go to court. How satisfied do people feel at the end of it? And nobody likes it's tricky to say. Like, most people feel like they lost, or they how do you square it?
Well, how I judge a settlement, if both parties are upset, it probably was a good one. But you know, when I say that 95% don't go to trial or to court, that's to divide and determine the assets. We have hearings and trials all the time in, you know, interim basis or such.
So you're going in front of a judge often in these situations, right?
Yeah, like, you know, I can be in court 2, 3, 4 times a week. Same with Sarah. It's just an actual trial to divide the assets. Usually 95% were settled because it's all money at the end of the day.
It's been fascinating. I think it is fascinating, and in some instances we talk about when you're getting in a relationship, it's good to have everything documented when it comes to your investments and your money. And as we said, it's not maybe romantic, but it's prudent. So if you've learned anything today, is that have those bases covered. And if you're in a situation where you're at the end of a relationship, it's great to get advice, and that's what you're there for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, get the advice before you end things if you can. Do it as quickly as possible so you know what your options are. So
speak to somebody before you pull the pin on this, right?
Especially if it's a second marriage, for sure. And if you have assets going into it.
Thanks for your time. We've had David Halkett, partner, McQuarrieHunter, and Sarah Morse, associate, McQuarrieHunter in Surrey. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll have you back. We're going to talk about pensions the next time and how you divide that. This is The Law Show. You've been listening to it right here on CL 650.